In keeping with the theme this semester of hymns of praise outside of the book of Psalms, the reading today is from the Song of Hannah in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 2. Talk no more so very proudly, let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. You may be seated. Whoever said life was fair? Is a quote from the grandpa in the movie The Princess Bride. And in the case of someone I know well, Dona Adelani, woman in Brazil, she'd had a very tough life, and life was not fair to her. Her husband was alcoholic and disappeared. I don't think they've ever found him. Abandoned the family, leaving her with 6 children, ranging in age from adolescent to infant. 2 of the older children got in trouble with the law. Adelani had no way to support them, particularly took odd jobs trying to pay rent on a dirt floor hovel in a Brazilian favela or slum. Very few options for a single, poor, unskilled mother in Brazil. Another case. John was a young man from a Christian family who joined the Navy seeking his fortune in England. And after a period of time, as the rap is on such sailors, he learned a rough, drunken, and immoral life. Then he transferred to a slave trading vessel. He became proficient at bringing slaves from Africa to England. One time, when he was in a drunken stupor, he fell overboard, and one of his crewmates was very quick and harpooned him in the side and reeled him in, or he would have died. Another time during a storm, he fell overboard, was in very rough seas, gave himself up for lost, and did what he hadn't done in many years. He prayed. And then events developed. We could multiply such examples in our own experience and in those around us. There are personal tragedies which seem unredeemable and pointless. How do Christians respond to vexations and tragedies? More to the point, how shall a Christian experience joy and praise in spite of crisis? How shall a Christian, using words from 1 Samuel, go from vexation to praise? So the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel 1 and 2 is a story about vexation. It's about emptiness and barrenness. First, it's about a barren woman who had no real future. Second, it's about that woman who trusts in the Lord and pours her soul out to Him. And third, how her barrenness and emptiness are redeemed. Well, the story in 1 Samuel begins with a statement that the man Elkanah was an Ephraimite and the great-great-grandson of Ephraimites. He had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. So he had some wealth and background pedigree. But the heritage and the wealth did not bring peace and unity to his family. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. fact, I've said often before to my classes, what qualifies you to be a matriarch in the Old Testament is you must first be barren, right? And then, of course, you will be a matriarch. This is something more serious than it is in our own day. It means she had no future. She could not contribute to the continuity and wealth of the family. It means the Lord had closed her womb and she was desolate. But what's injury without a little insult to go along with it? Peninnah was not content that Hannah should just be barren. The text says she provoked her and irritated her rival continuously, particularly once a year when it was time to go and sacrifice at the tabernacle at Shiloh for the regular sacrifices. Elkanah would assign sacrificial portions to Peninnah and her children, but only a single portion for Hannah. Think of it as going out to cafeteria on a Sunday after church, and Hannah got to sit at a little table across from the big family table where she sort of got to be a part of the proceedings, but not exactly. And so the result was that Hannah was greatly vexed and wept and refused to eat. I think the whole story of chapters 1 and 2 of 1 Samuel has a lot to do with eating and worshiping and vexation. Feast days were times of family and national fellowship and worship, and very times intended to promote unity and blessing. These times for Hannah were the most desolate and marginalized of times. The barrenness of her body mirrored by the barrenness of her soul. Sometimes in the midst of feasting, in the midst of corporate congregational activities and life and celebration, we may experience marginalization or vexation. I remember in elementary school realizing at some point that there were kids who were bigger and faster and smarter and more talented and more everything than I was, and I got older and I discovered that those same kids, now much older, are still bigger and faster and smarter and more talented than I am. Some people just get dealt a more modest hand than others do. Some are barren, if we can understand this word in a broader context, a wider meaning than simply childless. If by barren we mean marginal, empty, unproductive, on the edges, not fitting in somehow, living on the edge of family, church, and society, it may be that many of us at one time or another will experience this sort of loss, unproductiveness, marginalization, whatever you want to call it. So the family in Shiloh sacrificed and ate, Hannah at her little table off to the side. Hannah went afterwards to the house of God and began praying in her distress, silently with her lips moving, which apparently was a very weird thing in those days, to do such a thing. Why would one pray internally? Very unusual. And so, not surprisingly, the priest Eli thought she was drunk. Why else would someone be doing that? But Hannah said, no, she's not drunk, but she was pouring her soul out to the Lord. With her conviction that God had apparently abandoned her and her co-wife, her rival wife, was provoking her, she had little hope and no recourse but to take her distress to the Lord. But notice what she prays. We would understand it if she asked for relief from her family troubles and low social status. But she doesn't pray for that. She prays rather for God to look upon her affliction and give her a son so that she could dedicate that son to His service. She requested a child to benefit the family and take her rightful place in the family. When Eli understood her vexation, he said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have made to him." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her countenance was no longer sad. Why is it she's able to leave that situation with a light heart, a happy face, and enjoy a good meal? Let me suggest two things. First, she'd poured her heart out to the Lord. Earlier, we were told in the story that she had wept bitterly, but here she brings her distress to the Lord. Second, Eli sent her away with a blessing and with a prayer that God might grant her wish. She believed Eli's statement and blessing and believed that God had heard her prayer. It is the covenant commitment of God to be near to all who call on His name. Psalm 18:6 says this, "In my distress I called upon the Lord. To my God I cried for help. From His temple He heard my voice, and my cry to Him reached His ears." Deuteronomy 4:7, "What great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon Him?" And so Hannah voiced her complaint and her petition to the Lord. He drew near to Hannah and will certainly draw near to us as well if we call upon Him in our distresses, great and small. Likewise, as Hannah believed that God heard her voice, even so may we believe that the fervent prayers of His people are still effective, as James 5:16 reminds us. If we truly believe, as Hannah did, that God draws near to all those who call upon Him, we also may go forth with a changed countenance and greater capacity for fellowship. So we don't know how much time elapsed between Hannah's prayer and when the Lord grants her request. Only that it was in due time, in God's time. Also, she didn't fail to keep her promise to the Lord that if He gave her a son, she would turn him over forever to the work of God. But she prays a beautiful prayer, a hymn of praise, one of the most beautiful poems in Scripture. In fact, provided, I think, a great bit of inspiration for Mary's Magnificat in the New Testament. Let me read again 1 Samuel 2:5. "Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn." Hannah's prayer points out the great reversals of our faith. It is not the strong, the mighty, the prosperous, the talented, the successful which are finally blessed by God, but the weak, the hungry, the barren. So the theme of eating and emptiness comes full circle. The one who is empty is now full. The one who is barren is now fruitful. It is not God's intention simply to hear the cries of those who cry out to Him in His name, but eventually in His time to redeem those losses and distresses. Like Hannah, let us also give our distresses to the Lord, whether great or small, and fulfill our vows of praise. What about the end of the stories that I began with? Donna Adelani cried to the Lord in her distress. She became a Christian. She began sweeping floors in a hospital. She kept showing up. Can I do something? They gave her a broom. She swept. Well, what's that stuff over there? Well, it's beakers and glasses and such. Can I wash them? Sure. A week or two later, here's some stuff. Can you clean these? Sure. You know what? There are other things you could do around here, but you need some training. She became a registered nurse, bought her own house. Many of her kids became Christian. One of them came to the United States, graduated from a Christian university, married a missionary, and spent the next 10 years in Brazil. She's my foster sister. John the slaver on the high seas promised God if he survived the storm, he would dedicate his life to him. There in the waves, he did survive. And the slaver, known to us as John Newton, became a famous anti-slavery advocate in England and wrote one of the greatest hymns of all time, Amazing Grace.